Hello and welcome to the Beyond Day Zero podcast with me, Mark Day. Today I'm talking to Terry Newholm. Terry is a friend I've only met since starting an ethical business at the end of 2018. I've enjoyed many conversations with Terry, and he's someone I really respect. His insights and knowledge have often, I think, contributed to my own understanding strengthening, particularly in the areas of ethical consumption. Terry describes himself as a generalist with a varied background, but he's published a number of papers on consumer ethics, co-authored a book on the subject in 2005, and holds a doctorate in consumption ethics too. I've been looking forward to this episode since Terry and I first discussed recording together a couple of months back, and I hope in it we sort of overview the subject reasonably well and explain some of the issues with the current approaches to tackling the existential crisis that we're facing. Please have a listen and let me know what you think. So maybe, firstly, you could do a quick explanation of your background with sort of consumer ethics, and explain as much as you want about it. Really, we've got plenty of time at this point. Yeah, and then we'll kick into the specific.
You cut me short later.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of different things in my life. All the way from starting off in an architectural office through to setting up small cooperative businesses in Lambeth. And then about quite late in life, really, all the people that kind of lived around us, we had a whole food shop, kind of rather like yours, except that it was a cooperative. And, one after another, the people who worked there went off to do a local degree.
Yeah.
And I hadn't done that when I was young, so off I went to do a local degree, which turned out to be, successful, and I was able to then go straight on to do a PhD. And so I put in this bid with the Open University, who seemed quite keen on the idea, to do work on ethical consumers. And the basic idea was to attract people who saw themselves as ethical consumers and go and interview them and, put that all together and kind of see what it was about. Obviously, I was quite used to that in a way, because working in a whole food shop, you bump into loads of these people, really.
Indeed you do.
Indeed you do, yes. And so that way, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Going out to interview nice people is a real pleasure. And then I wrote up, and that was all. I got the doctorate, so that's what kind of drew me into that. While I was doing the research, do you know Rob Harrison, who's the editor of Ethical Consumer magazine?
I know Ethical Consumer magazine, and I know his name. So just an awareness, yeah.
Well, of course, I contacted him, but so did two other people who were starting research on the same subject at the same time. And one of them, we became friends because, obviously we had very similar issues that we were dealing with.
Yeah.
And I've published almost all of the papers that I've written. I've published with her, and we really, I think, were able to sort of get a handle onto this idea of what we've later called consumption ethics, to distinguish it from the capitalist form of ethical consumption. And we ended up, I think the last paper we wrote together was on a history for consumption ethics, because otherwise it appeared as if it wasn't there in history. But of course it is. You can go back and back and back, and people have always tried to bring morality to their consumption.
Yeah.
And if you accept that, of course, you're part of a long, long movement, and that does make it feel somewhat better, I think.
Yeah.
So that's how I sort of think. Well, I suppose the other thing I should say is that, of course, working in that area, the morality of consumption, you keep bumping into unsustainability and the scientists who are writing on it. And I suppose after I've retired, which was officially 2011, but it's since then I have been kind of working on and off anyway. But I've tended to read up more on sustainability since then, and I suppose that's kind of what's brought me into that whole area, really.
Yeah. So there's a whole level of detail behind that piece that you were talking about, the ethics of consumerism, of consumption, isn't there? It's that detail about whether it's truly sustainable. It's very easy on the surface for it to appear that certain habits, that certain movements are things that we should jump on and follow and get into, and yet are they truly sustainable? And I guess that's the thing that you and I have been discussing, and indeed what we'll get a little more into tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're right. In the sense that we're obviously trying to find a path to sustainability. I mean, the situation we're in, the scientists are telling us, is dire. And so trying to find what path will get us there is the obvious thing to do. And actually it's interesting because looking through the scientific work and papers that are coming through now, there seems to be a whole area of study developing that is looking at pathways to sustainability. And although I've only dipped into that, it does look like it's going to be quite a substantial developing area. I mean, what's happened with all of these things in academia is that ethical consumption ethics was virtually absent before we started work. There were a few studies in America in the 80s, 2 books written, but largely speaking, no one was studying it or writing on it. And of course, sustainability was a relatively small area, and it's suddenly exploded. It's absolutely huge now, and it overtook ethical consumption massively. So actually, there is so much work out there to be able to get your head around even a part of it is now a real challenge.
Yeah, and you obviously have been trying to get your head around parts of it and understand it. Yeah, and the kind of information that you've asked, to me, and as I think, well, perhaps explain, if you wouldn't mind, your interest in that kind of documentation that we've both now seen. You've explained some of the issues with sustainability and solutions that are needed to tackle the problems we now face.
I suppose the Thomas Princeton quote that I sent to you seems to me in a way to characterize it very well. I mean, I fully agree with him, and I was kind of thinking along those lines anyway. And I think a lot of the writers were that what seems to be happening at the moment is that we are taking the lifestyle that we have at the moment and looking at it piecemeal, this part, flying, traveling, eating food, and we're taking each part in turn. We're saying, how can we make this, well, I'm going to use the words, more sustainable. Now, if you think about what does more sustainable mean, but it's all over the place, and I've even seen you use it once. I think
I've probably used it many times, Terry.
Yes, but what does it mean? We are unsustainable at the moment. So what we're actually saying with most of the projects is that we're making them less unsustainable. Yeah. But that's a hard sell. And so that's the one way of looking at it. And that seems to be doomed to failure, because we're almost certainly always going to fall short of what would be needed to develop a sustainable society. And then Princeton says, well, there's the other way, which accepts that we're just way off beam for sustainability. And so we need to look at wholesale changes to our society to bring down its impact massively. The book, can I just look up and see it? Yeah. It's the book that quote came from is called Confronting Consumption, because Princeton argues that he's an American. In polite American society, you don't mention consumption. In other words, you don't question how much we consume, and you don't question what we consume or any of those things. So you can mention sort of anything else, like, oh, I'm planting trees, or, you know, whatever you're doing, but you don't question consumption. And of course, that second way of looking at it, consumption is centrally confronted in that. If let's say, could I give you an anecdote from the past that illustrates those two ways of looking at it? So my last but one doctoral student was came to the end of her second year, and each year she presents her work to an academic who is not aware of her work, so it brings a fresh eye to it. But she did that, and it was fine, and the academic who had the power to say yes or no said, yes, fine, go into your third year. Her work was about what she called ongoing consumers, who are people who consume more or less like the average, and also they kind of mark their life with consumption. So they get a promotion, they buy a new car. Yeah. So it's kind of, they were deeply into consumption. At the end of it, so we all relax now because she's going through to her third year. And the academic said, I know exactly what you mean, she said. What we need to do is, say, perfume. We need to design the bottles so that they all go closer together. We can get a lot more on the lorry, and we use far less petrol. There was a deadly silence. and my student said, no, that isn't what I mean. What I mean is we all need to get used to the normal bodily smells.
Yeah, indeed.
And it illustrates perfectly this idea of tinkering with the world to try and reduce our impact, or saying, we've gone up a wrong route here. Let's just step back and say, no, we don't need these, we don't need those. We're going to live completely differently. And that's what Thomas Princeton is talking about, I think. Really.
Yeah, and I'm in complete agreement with that view. It is incredibly frustrating, and it's not the case that I would, say that I always like to point out that I don't want to be, when you were in the position of being in charge of being part of a cooperative with a whole food shop, and with us opening our shop and, being part of that early zero waste movement that came along, I know that there are people that look at you and put you on a bit of a pedestal, and that's always going to be the case. And and it's not that we are ever living some perfect lifestyle, but it drives me crazy, the things that I see. It's incredible. I think it's just that because of the scale of the problems, when I see that people are coming out with new products all the time that are chiefly sold to us because, I never buy these things. They instantly get deleted when I see these emails and things. But new products are coming about and they're being sold as ethical products. But they are, no different than any other products. Exactly like you say, they may be packaged differently, but they are still a new thing that we don't really need. I saw one just today that was about, and I don't have a beard, so correct me if I'm wrong, about beard oil and things, and men's grooming, which has become a thing. And it's like, do we really need any of those things at all at this point in time? These are the superfluous things that, as you're just saying, that really we need to learn to live without. And there just seems to be a whole load of people getting into new ventures like that, as though they are part of a solution.
Yes.
So they're somehow going to change things for the better. And that's not being critical of the people that are involved in those things. It's very difficult, isn't it, for the right message to get across to everybody. And I guess that goes back to that, the two ways of viewing the situation that you talked about. We often are told that certain things that are marginal improvements that are like talked about by governments as though they're the game changers we need, and yet all they are tinkering at the edges of things. And even when those things are get implemented, they're often watered down anyway, which dives further. But they're nowhere near the changes that are needed, and yet we're convinced that they're a step along the way, as in do enough of those things and we get to where we need to be. And that's just plainly not true, is it?
No, it isn't true. No. An example of what I would say is the opposite to that sort of tinkering at the edges is a study by, I don't know whether you've come across this. It's got a strange name. It's the Eat Lancet Commission. Lancet being the bunch of journals that's highly respected, but this commission was set up some time ago now, and it's a bunch of scientists, social scientists, and everybody that would be needed to do this piece of research. And it is about what we should eat for health and what we should eat for a sustainable environment. But the thoroughness with which they go through it is quite astonishing. And I've only got the summary of it, but it's obviously a superb piece of research. But at the end of it, it does give you an idea of what sort of degree of change is necessary. It sets out for what we would have to eat when we get to, I think it's 2050, and they do it for a population of 10 billion humans, we probably will level out a little bit below that. But obviously, that's the first thing, is you leave a bit of leeway so that, you don't fall short. And then there's a team of doctors who set out what they think the best diet for humans would be. And then there's a team of scientists who set out what the impact of producing that diet by farming. And the net result is that we have to have a near total plant-based diet. And forget whether it's Whitman or the other guy, Johan Rockström. I think it's Rockström, because there's some videos that go with it that are really good and well worth watching. And Rockström said the small amount of meat is optional. And when I say small amount of meat, I mean 1 burger per week, or, and or is important, 1 juicy steak per month. And so the sheer scale of the change that is necessary comes to life if you do study things through. So, like whatever they intend for aeroplanes, actually take it right through and see what the impact is.
Yeah.
And if at the end of it, it isn't sustainable, then you're wasting your time. And ditto with, sort of most other things. So I'm really, well, in one way, I was really keen to let the scientists loose and say, okay, we need to work out whether this is okay, what we need to do to that, what do we need to do to this, and do similar kind of studies for all of those things. And I suspect some of them are being done anyway. But in another way, it seems an awful lot of work to find out something that we kind of instinctively know.
Yeah.
Because you've been talking about it already.
Yeah.
In those ways.
Yeah. This is the space that's quite difficult to bridge, isn't it? Because as you say, we know what's needed in a way, and yet is it that we are not convinced as individuals? Is it that we're not convinced as individuals that we have individual power to actually change it? And how else is change going to happen if it's not from individuals? Is it that we're waiting to be told what to do by someone who we have allowed to have authority over us? I don't know. I don't know where that change comes from. Is it that the overwhelming influence of our culture, of advertising, of consumerism is so powerful that is kind of just keeping us on the same track and not allowing us the space to kind of jump onto an alternative? I don't know what it is, but there's definitely a bridge that needs to be crossed, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that the answer is to actually scare people into submission. There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way, but I don't know what it is. It just seems like there's a huge gulf between where we are and where we need to get to.
Well, the Ipcc last report, which came out about a week ago, if that didn't scare people, I don't know what. But yes, they probably, very few people have read it, and so we're not scared. I think the research suggests that people will tend to put the responsibility on someone else. So most people will say that's for the government to do. They will also say that's for the companies to do. And the companies have encouraged that, because in what they've been writing in their environmental reports is, don't worry about it. We've got a handle on this. We will be zero, carbon zero by whatever time. And so the average consumer sits back and thinks, oh, fine. That was actually that student's research. That was her finding, that actually the consumers are agreeing with the corporations that it's the corporations' problem to deal with.
Yeah. that's shocking that we can give away that power so easily and also actually believe that those changes are going to happen and are happening. Again, I think I suppose we believe the high level messages that we would see from companies to say that they're, exactly like you just described, to say that they're actually doing something about it, and we don't go any lower than that very often, or a lot of us don't, for whatever reason that is. We don't actually dig into it and question what they are actually doing, and there are many different aspects on that. Going back to what you were saying at the start, sustainability. A company like that, I suppose, it's just almost a meaningless statement, and it almost, as you say, defining what it actually is very hard. But when they can almost latch onto that as a positive thing and say, we are, becoming, as you said, becoming more sustainable. It's that same point. What are they actually doing? What action are they actually taking? And to what end? To what goal? What are they aiming for? At what point will they have achieved what? What have they defined that they're going to do? And I don't see that detail really is there at all. I see that it's very much greenwashing at the moment.
Yes, I think that's right.
I think it's there as a headliner that they can stick a nice sticker on to say sustainable or green, and business as usual is continuing. I'm not convinced.
I think there's. Sorry.
I was just going to say I'm not convinced it can. Well, it can't continue for very much longer, and I'm not convinced it will continue like that for very much longer. But that's definitely, I feel, where we are. Yeah.
I mean, that's not to say that there aren't people in business who are, I think, really trying to make a difference, to improve their company, and to change things about. But probably there is enough. Well, I suppose the other aspect that we haven't touched on yet is it is a pretty intractable problem. Finding a path to sustainability, and that includes for the businesses themselves, because I mean, a piece of research that really I've realised made things vastly more difficult was Chancel and Piketty. Piketty is an economist, but is I don't know. He's a heterodox economist. So he's not a market liberal like all the other economists, and he's got a bestseller book, sort of really thick one called Capital, which normally you wouldn't think would capture the imagination very much, but anyway. So I don't know whether Piketty might have been his PhD student. I'm not sure, but they wrote this paper together, and what they've done is they've drawn a direct connection between environmental damage and access to money, in other words, income and your capital. So in other words, if you are affluent, it doesn't matter what you do with your money, your damage will be more than someone who isn't affluent. And that struck me as a serious problem, because if we want to get to sustainability, that means that the people have to stop thinking that, oh, I'm going to earn more money. That's good. We actually have to start thinking, what is sufficient for the lifestyle that I want to live, and it's got to be a sustainable lifestyle. Now, I suspect that at one point you made a choice between the environment and money, and that was good, brilliant. And one of my sons has certainly done that as well. So it's not beyond people to actually say, no, actually, my life will be better not chasing the money, but getting my life useful and doing good things. So it's not impossible, but I don't know. I wouldn't like to sit in a room with someone who is exceptionally rich and try and persuade them that actually they'd be better off, and we would all be better off. The environment would be less damaged if you reduced your income.
Yeah, it's very true. A couple of things came up while you were talking about that. So a principle that you're definitely well aware of, I know, Terry, is that I think it's in, I think we read it in that, I don't know the guy's name. I always get it wrong. Is it Tim Berners-Lee or is it the other one? That's terrible. I can't even remember his name. He wrote There's No Planet B. Anyway.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And it talks about the rebound effect. And that does link into what you're saying about, when we have, particularly when we have income, we might, I'll borrow one of your examples. You talk about the drive. You've talked to me a few times about the drive to like insulate our homes and how that means we spend less money on heating our homes, but then we have extra disposable income that we go out and do something else damaging with. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? But from our action in one area, it can cause an unseen effect in another area. And I think that does come back to the supply and our ability to earn money, the supply of money in a way, and those that are wealthy are having, as you say, more the ability to
I've insulated my roof, or just had it insulated. but I was well aware that, I mean, it's probably not a very clever thing to do, but I don't know. You do things because you hope for the best, even when you know that there can be a rebound effect. And we probably do need to do those things, but if we could do it at the same time as reducing our income relative to how much heating was saved, then that would be fine. I have to say that's not what I intend to do, and I have to say, like you don't get everything right because you live in a society that is so fixated on consumption, and I mean I'm finding it quite a struggle, for instance, not to buy a new camera. I have two cameras. Of course, with digital cameras, they go out of date and they've got lots more pixels now, and I've been taking some pictures and it would be really good to have one that had twice the number of pixels, but so far, touch wood, I haven't bought one. And I'm hoping I don't. But I mean, for anybody, it is a struggle.
It is. It is very difficult, that influence, those influences that are out there.
Yeah.
I was going to say regarding that point that we were just on about that you mentioned, where you said the potential for people to change from high income to that's enough, to that view of that's enough, living a more modest lifestyle. I think sometimes it takes, I'm sure it's not the only way, but my own personal experience in a way was personal pain. Like I was the demands of living the alternative lifestyle. And as you say, it's very easy. And I have been there when I was younger, of getting a promotion, getting more money, having something to show for it, buying something, changing my car or something like that. It's it links into what you were just saying about the camera. It's so easy to be drawn into that way of living, but eventually the personal impact of living a far more stressful lifestyle demands of a well-paid sort of professional career, ever increasing demands, ever increasing performance that was demanded of you.
Yes.
More hours, less free time, busier hours at work, personal stress levels going up and up and up. I just reached the point where it wasn't possible for me to carry on like that. And
yes.
that's what I think definitely eventually drove me to look at alternatives. And it was a steady process, almost like a stepped process. But eventually, I called a halt to it because I couldn't. In a way, I think I'd learned enough about this sort of area, even though I wasn't directly involved in it as a job then, that I thought I'm not happy with continuing to work for a global corporation. I was self-employed as an IT contractor in the last role that I did, but working for a global bank, and I just saw some of the stuff that they were talking about that they were doing as great successes, huge development projects. I vividly remember one of the things that I was going to say, it didn't push me out the door, but got me to jump out of the door more quickly than I needed to, was the fact that there was something on their internal, their intranet about a development project somewhere in the Far East, where there was a coastline and it had been kind of a fishing village. It had probably been marshy coastal area as you went inland from it, and now it was skyscrapers and high-rise buildings. And I was like, and this to them was success. And I was just like, I cannot be here any longer.
No.
This is just personally so far away from my values that, I think it was just. I don't know how. It's not going to be the same for everybody, but I think the undeniability of climate change is going to be brought home to more and more people very, very quickly. And it's really funny. The other thing that I was going to get into was the fact that I've listened to quite a few things that Rob Hopkins has done, and I've listened to his podcast, and I'm halfway through his book at the moment. And he talks about, for people that don't know, I'd recommend that anyone tunes into those podcasts. They're really good. But he asks questions, sometimes quite big questions, sometimes smaller questions, but they're what ifs about the future. And he asks guests to imagine an alternative future 10 years from now where changes have happened based on the questions. And it might be, what if we no longer flew? If there was no air travel, things like that. And he often, invariably, it seems that what people talk about in these imagined futures are the simple pleasures in life as being the important ones.
Yeah.
And that gives me real hope, actually, that what we're not actually after more and more of the same of what we've got now. We're not after accumulating wealth. Not really. When you really get down to it, you might look at things that make life a little better. But there's a definite point, isn't there? And it's probably one that's not far away from most. It probably is what most people already have. And I'm not denying that there's huge inequality and there are problems in this country, in our society. But, we are in the Western world living very, very comfortable lives that could quite, with the right drivers, be more modest. And what we are really after is more connection, more simple pleasures, more connecting with nature. It's those sorts of things. And those, whilst there will undoubtedly be significant changes that, as you were saying, regarding our diet in the future, they're not actually bad things. There will be some bad things for people. That's the point that we're rapidly heading towards. But actually, the things that really matter to us are here now and be more a part of our lives in the future. And I find that really interesting. And I'm convinced that I become more and more convinced that the direction that he pursues, Rob Hopkins, and that use of our imagination to bring about,
Yes.
to imagine possible scenarios and visioning of possible scenarios for the future, even if they're not ones that actually happen, but to look at possibilities is really vital. And I find it really fascinating to read a bit more about the work that he's done and find out how much of that we've actually lost and we're not utilizing. I find it really, it's definitely a hopeful thing. And there are so many situations where we could, we're presented with this, whilst we're presented with the facts from the scientists about what's happening and what's going to happen, we're drawn into seeing in our imaginations a dystopian future somewhat now, as though we can't do anything about it. Now, we might not be able to reverse some of the things that have happened, but I'm more and more convinced that if we were to educate children in a different way, so that creativity and imagination and project-based work was more at the core of what we do in our education systems, and if as adults we did that more, that we could actually achieve a lot more quickly than with other ways of with a lot of other ways of working, and I think it would be. Well, I think it would bring a more hopeful future to a lot of people and engage a lot more people. I don't know how we get there either. I'll leave that one to Rob Hopkins, I think, but I just wanted to kind of bring that into the conversation really and see what you thought about it too.
Yeah, no, I was, when I started reading Rob Hopkins' things, a friend kind of persuaded me. And from what I know of transition towns, lovely people, but it's not on the kind of scale that I was looking for. But when you get into reading Rob Hopkins, it's very different. It really is a massive change. And even in those first few pages of his What If book, he's already taking you into this sort of wonderful living space that is his imagined space, and you're wandering about this town of his mind, and it's glorious. It's much greener. The car parks have gone. The people can move around freely. It's very convivial, and it really is somewhere you think, I'd like to have a holiday there, and I might live there as well. It's really good, and there's a feeling of less of a rush, and more of a very humane way of living. And I think you're right. If people realise we could run things much less stressfully, and prioritise the sort of good things in life, then that would it is a saleable point. But I think we're at the moment we are so ground into this idea of more and more, and an escalating economy, which of course we cannot continue with growth in the economy. That simply won't work. And I think most academics in the area agree with that. We couldn't keep extending the economy. But that's the biggest sell, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I wonder if there's a link from people that get involved in movements. It's actually, I guess, in a way, I always, in recent years, feel like I want to do as much as I possibly can, and I've been involved in various things, and obviously that's why I'm doing these podcasts. It's why I'm doing this while we have our business, and it inspires me to think about how sometimes, even in conversations with customers, people are aware of the problems. To probably the people that I speak to, you won't be surprised to hear, are probably quite aware of the scale of the problems. And I
Yes.
think the general feeling is feeling that we're going to struggle to do something about it, and maybe we can't do anything about it. And it's inspiring me to think about just maybe not as though I can come up with and you don't necessarily have to come up with an answer, but just to kind of shift the conversation now and again into thinking about what a better future might look like.
Yes.
I just think even for our own personal well-being, really, I think that's necessary. When you and I both have sort of talked in the past, and we've been to meetings where the climate crisis has been very much something that the groups we were involved with have been trying to do something about. And I recognised when I read the Extinction Rebellion book, it had I think that was the point where the actual detail of the scale of the problems hit me like something like being, there was almost a physical reaction. Well, there was a physical reaction. There was a physiological reaction to it for a few days afterwards. And I think that there are enough stories out there in the media, and necessarily so to a degree, that are telling us about the problems and the scale of them and the truth of those. That truth is really important. But it's obviously going to have, I can't see any other way that it has a background effect on everybody that's going to sort of sit there once you've taken that on board. But I don't personally feel like continual exposure to that level of bad news is helpful nor necessary once you've kind of deeply acknowledged that we really are in a mess and need to do something about it. I think it's disempowering. I think that message needs to reach people.
It is.
That message definitely needs to reach people, but to continually live with that hitting you every day is, it's just immobilizing. It's it disables you from actually being involved in a solution. And I again think that I may have personally found something that I quite like in terms of this. I think visioning was something that we might have talked about in a group going back 12 months, 18 months or more. And it was a new thing to me. And I think maybe that the trajectory that I personally am on now is one where that's becoming more and more important to allow me to kind of, I want to say to live well whilst holding knowledge of the scale of the issues that we face. And I think that's something that perhaps is going to be good for us all. But again, I don't know how we get to that point of, of getting to probably the majority of people in a Western society that are on a. It's not the case. It's not the case for. It probably isn't the majority of people all the time, but it's a lot of people some of the time that are on a path, on a kind of a work, stressful, busy lifestyle treadmill almost.
Yes. Oh, yes, too much of a treadmill, really, to think about it. I mean, yes, I agree with you. I love the envisioning. Oh dear, I'm going to struggle with that one. Envisioning. I said a little way back that I thought the kind of hyper science where we try to follow everything through and say what we can and can't do was probably not necessary, because there's this feeling that in our gut we really do know. And I think that fits much more with what Rob Hopkins does, because he doesn't really pay a lot of attention to the science. What he pays attention to is a massive change in the way that we live, to something simpler, happier, more relaxed, and that to me, I think it's only because of preparing really to talk with you that I thought, well, yeah, paths out of this. And I really did feel that although I like the science, you're right, after the IPCC report, I went into a dive for the rest of the week. I was, really in a dark place. Not that I didn't know it was coming, because I pretty well knew all the stats anyway. It's just that I know some of the scientists, and I know what they must be feeling like now, and it is deeply depressing. But Rob Hopkins, when you read his stuff, you feel uplifted. It's, we can do this. This will be fabulous. I wonder if we can pull this off.
Yeah,
it's a completely different feeling.
And even if it's not a utopia, it's a positive future where we can live well with more modest means and tackle the problems that we face. It's not about, well, I think he says, doesn't he, that it's not that it's unrealistic, because who could argue what's more realistic, a more realistic future? It's about imagining an alternative, imagining an alternative, a better future, and not just it's not just putting a pair of rose tinted glasses on and saying everything will be okay. It's about saying, as you've just described, we need to tackle significant problems. We need to make. I think you said to me, or you wrote, it's about, we need to let go of some of the things that we take for granted, but we can still live well. And that just reminds me of the changes that you were describing in that well researched Lancet food publication.
The Lancet.
That even a change like that is going to be a transition for some people, quite a leap from where their diets are now. But it's not like there isn't good food to be eaten.
Oh no, it's fabulous food to be eaten. Plant-based food, yeah.
Are you aware then of other areas that are tackling? I know you, as you're saying, maybe it's not necessary to see everything through to its conclusion, but you describe really well that work that they've done in looking at the future of our food production and how much of a problem our food production is in terms of emissions and climate change. Are you aware of other areas of work, areas of study that are actually looking at other things in isolation, like our food and our diet?
And I know that there was the IPCC study on travel, so that would take into cars, flying, all of those kind of things. But some of these documents are just huge, and I suppose that's one of the other troubles with the science, is that we have all these specialists, and they're fabulous, of course, wonderful at what they do, but actually trying to draw things together. So the generalists who try to find an overview, it's such a huge task, really, and there aren't that many generalists about trying to pull it all together and saying, so this is what's there, this is how it all kind of fits with the way forward, or anything like that. But yeah, there are. I've just dipped into the one on travel. So, for instance, it pointed to problems like we need to change transport to some kind of sustainable fuel. But what is happening at the moment is that at other places around the world that are not entirely based on cars are becoming so. Yeah. So what we're sort of doing is we're saying, well, we're going to plan to make our cars electric, and therefore we'll be able to produce enough electricity for those sustainably. But we're not thinking, would that work for everybody in the world? Because if we do go to just below 10 billion people, obviously many of those will be children, won't have cars, but if cars are ubiquitous, does it make sense to be able to say, yes, they can all be electric? Because I don't think the study is there for that. As far as I know, I could be wrong on that. But so that sort of that generalism of bringing it all together is extremely difficult. So, for instance, reading up on methane a while ago, because obviously I was reading the book on farming. We were going to go and talk to the farmers with Craig. And I thought, well, I need to know more about methane. And I'm reading the paper, it's fine. It tells me it's a short-lived gas, about 10 years. So that's great, because if we can reduce it, it goes down, the overload goes down very quickly. It's a very virulent gas, so it's one that needs to be dealt with because it's very much a global warming one. So I'm getting what I want out of it, even though it's quite hard reading. But then it gradually dawns on me that these guys are not actually desperately concerned with that. What's happening is they're looking at the graph of methane in the air kicking upwards, and they can't explain that in terms of the extra farming. So they are speculating around whether we have tripped one of the tipping points. And it's at that point that you realise that the scientists are really, they're a stage on. They're looking at if this goes out of our hands, because there's a cycle there that will build methane regardless of what we do. And so again, I suppose that's only getting back to what you were saying about the science can be very dispiriting, because you think you're getting somewhere and all of a sudden, oh God, you realise what they're actually talking about here. So that didn't go where I intended it to, but yeah, that's been my experience. Bringing the generalism together is really very, very difficult. There's a few people who do it well. I think one of my favourites is Tim Jackson. Tim Jackson is an economist who has worked with the government. I suspect they've got rid of him by now, but and his book is Prosperity Without Growth.
Okay. And
it's talking about it in a kind of more serious way than Rob Hopkins, with his kind of, because Rob Hopkins is fun to read. Yeah. You know, it's a good read as a book, whereas Tim Jackson is a more kind of serious piece. But he's saying much the same thing. You know, we've got to move into things that we enjoy more, rather than just being obsessed with production and the increase of production all the time. So yeah, there are people who are trying to pull it together, and you know, some of them are quite fabulous, really. But we have reached that time where we've almost enough of the generalists' work, of the specialists' work, is done. We know that all of these trends. We don't even have to measure the ice anymore, really, because there's no doubt. I suppose what they're looking for is the point at which it levels out and the melt begins to fall again, and they keep measuring just in the hope that might be it. But so what questions that we need people to be answering, isn't it? And some people are stepping forward and doing it.
Yeah, and it's whatever the result, it's the work that those scientists that are involved in looking at the climate change sort of indicators are doing is, you know, I suppose it's reassuring to a degree that they're ahead of the game, you know, as the case that you just described. it might not be the news that we want to hear, but the fact that they're, as you say, they're not just looking at the agricultural methane, but they're already going, no, actually, we need to, this is where we need to be. And the recommendations that are going to come out, if there's a generalized summary of that sort of thing, are going to be, based on not just, based on really detailed, up-to-date science. And well, it can't be any other way. We have to have that informing our future direction, and well, I'd like to say future policy decisions, but that always seems a doubt as to any government actually taking such note of such things and setting our future direction based on actually where we need to be.
I agree with you, but if you've lived as long as I have, okay, people can't see my face. It goes back a long way.
Very young. Very young.
You can see huge changes. I mean, when we had the Whole Food shop, we asked the people who were bringing things in these various packaging, and some of it was plastic, and we said to them, isn't it possible to make some of this biodegradable? And they just fell about laughing.
Yeah. Oh.
So we have made huge progress. That now, if you said that to someone who was supplying you, is there any way we can kind of sort this one out? They'd take it seriously. And I agree, the government is still way off beam. But if you consider the governments of when I was younger, I mean, they wouldn't even entertain these things. And now they are really under pressure. I mean, they're in a really difficult position, because if they go too far, they get voted out. And if Boris Johnson was to go too far, in parenthesis, then his right wing would just ditch him.
Yeah.
So it is very difficult, even if he fully believed that we were in desperate trouble, and there will be scientists really going at him. It is very difficult for him. I sometimes wonder whether it's better for a right-wing government to try and bring these things in than a left-wing government that will get pilloried anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, things have changed enormously. Not just the huge amount of research, but actually the seriousness with which most companies will take it, even if they're not yet doing anything like the right thing. You won't get laughed out. I mean, some young man that I know quite well actually went into his boss and said, we have a policy for decarbonising, but there's no end date on it. And the guy said, oh, well, we will come to this. And he said, but, the usual statement, if not now, when?
Yeah.
And he didn't get the sack.
Yeah.
Which, a while ago, he'd have been out straight away.
Yeah. It's coming, isn't it? And it has, this doesn't go away by leaving it alone and not taking action.
Oh, no.
And the window kind of shifts in a direction, as you were saying a minute ago, in relation to the fact that there's a right-wing government, a conservative government in the UK in power that are taking this seriously. You're right. Go back 2 decades even, and to have had somewhat green policies, being actually pursued back then would have seemed a huge change of direction, wouldn't it?
It would have done, yeah. No, I mean, we're still opening oil wells, so we shouldn't get too sort of pleased. But it feels for me, I've experienced being way on the outside of these things, and and it feels now that it's being spoken about.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of changing the terms of discussion.
Yeah, and in relation to individual or family lifestyles and choices, so do you think the takeaway message from the subject, that we've talked around it and gone, we've explored it in detail. It's been a really good chat, but do you think it's about, I guess for me, it's some, I've had people often say in conversations with me in the shop about the fact that it's very complicated, the thinking that you have to do, because you think that you're making a good decision. And I think it's our left brain that kind of looks at sort of the detail of a certain thing and fixes that, but the other part of our being our right brainness, to use probably an expression that's probably not grammatically correct, is aware of the detail, and we're aware that there's more to it, and yet so we end up making what we think is good choices, and then we try to think about the whole, and it becomes very difficult. But I feel like we have to make difficult choices now. We have to be aware of the whole.
Yeah.
We have to do work that kind of, in terms of the choices we make, we have to have regard for the actual planetary resources, the planetary boundaries that we're regularly leaping across, and do something to act within them. Do you think that's the takeaway message?
I personally, yes. I mean, my area of study was ethical consumption. I think it will be very difficult for me to say that you don't try and do the very best you can. And seeing that it came from a long history of doing that convinces me even more that to be true to that tradition. There was, particularly a guy called John Woolman, 18th century, came to the UK to speak at a Quaker meeting, the main London meeting. Got off the boat, got on to the mail coach to go to London. And by the time he got there, he decided that the horses were so ill-treated that he would never use a coach again. Well, that was pretty well the only way of getting around, apart from riding a horse. And he decided that the horses were the ones that were really badly treated. And from then on, he walked everywhere. It's kind of that's the kind of line that we're in. This kind of really, if it's wrong, make a change. If it's really upset you, then make a change. And he's a really fine person. So, but having said that, I mean, I'm really aware that there are loads of things in my life that are contradictions. That if we did get to Rob Hopkins, you don't want it to be called a utopia, and you're right. But his town, which is a goodly place, there would still be huge changes that I would have to make, and I am slightly scared of those. But the changes I've made in the past, actually, like you say, changing to vegan. We've been vegetarian for a long while, but changing to vegan, I viewed with a bit of horror, really. But actually, when it came to it, we just gradually dropped things out of the diet, and ended up fine. And now it seems normal, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Stopping flying, that was 2005. We just published a book, The Ethical Consumer, and we each, instead of saying what wonderful academics we were, we each wrote something about our consumption. And of course, I had to write that I was getting a bit worried about the amount as an academic I was flying. And once you've written it down, you've got to do something about it. So that was the point I stopped flying. But, do I feel deprived? No, not really. I mean, as you were saying earlier, kind of, as a shopkeeper and having people to come in to chat to, you will have noticed that one of my pleasures of life is going round to the cafe owners and shopkeepers that I know and having a chat. Yeah. And it's wonderful, Yeah. So why should I miss flying? Doesn't really matter. I think once you've made the decision on these things, it does become easy. But there are things that I'm still nervous of making the change. But if we, try and make the, I think there is actually, there's advice. I'm just trying to think. It's, what's his name? Hang on. Oh, yeah. There's advice from David T Schwartz, who is, as far as I know, the only philosopher who's written a book on consumption. Okay. And it is called Consumer Choices. So as a philosopher, he takes you right through the choices you're making.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things he advises is try and look for the things that you think will have a big impact first. And actually, there is research that suggests that mostly what we do is things that have small impacts. Hence, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You still do more damage with more money, but Schwartz is quite good for advice on what to do, and also he gives very compelling arguments as to why you should, as an individual, engage with this. It's very, very closely argued book. Philosophers always are, aren't they? But
they are.
It's quite an easy read. You can make your way through it. That's good. So yes, I think. We have a duty. Yes, we have a duty to try our best in these things. That's his argument, essentially, after about 100 pages or so.
Fantastic. That's another one for the book list. There's been some good references there. When I go listen back to this episode, I will make a note of all those and I'll put them in the episode notes, because you've said several books, and I've thought I want to read all of those. So, Terry.
Well, there's about another 100 of them on the bookshelf.
That's a long list. I mean, Terry, thank you very much for spending the time with me and doing this.
It's been very enjoyable.
I always enjoy our chats, and I always appreciate the knowledge that you bring to our conversations. I've really enjoyed it, and the time has absolutely flown. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, no, it was a great pleasure. I mean, as you can see, I enjoy talking about talking with other people. It's great.
You've got a lot. You have a lot of experience with the subject, and I've always felt like you've got there's untapped knowledge that I can access within you, and you're readily able and very eloquently able to share it. So it's great. Thank you again.
Okay, very nice. I shall see you soon.
So, what did you think? I personally gained a lot from that episode. It helped to firm up my own thinking and probably will help to embed more change in my own life. Do let me know the impact that this one has had on you. Contact the show via email to beyonddayzeropodcast@gmail.com. Do let me know if there's any other guests that you think would make future episodes really interesting. And just a quick apology for some of the sound quality in that episode. When I recorded, I had my microphone set wrongly, so I've had to spend a lot of time editing that one to boost my own sound levels up. Apologies for that. Try to sort that out better next time. Okay, thanks for listening. See you next time.